Sorry about that.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Life After. I'm here with my friend Chuck Parson, and
Hello.
Who are you here with?
And I am here with our guest Suandria Hall. Suandria Hall, excuse me. Suandria is out of Colorado, Denver, Colorado. She is an LPCC, which is a licensed professional clinical counselor. She also does some online counseling and some coaching. And she works with religious trauma in particular, among other things. So she's got an interesting background. She's got a lot of interesting things to say about religious trauma and how to deal with it and how to grow out of it. So we're pretty excited to have her on the show. Suandria, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Thanks for being on the show. So let's just kind of jump into your background a little bit. So you grew up in a Pentecostal holiness church, right? And
Yeah.
you have a lot of preachers in your family. You're a preacher's kid. You have a preacher cousin. You have a preacher grandparent. You kind of all over the place, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm from a very large country black family,
Okay.
and my dad's one of 16.
Oh, wow.
My mom, yeah, my mom's
Yeah,
one of
big family.
10. So that makes for lots of cousins, lots of extended family,
Right.
Damn.
and in a very, very large portion of my dad's family specifically are ministers. So, that was life for us.
God,
Right.
it's
Everyone's a preacher.
Right.
so entrenched into the culture of your family. Wow.
So I mean, you were in church almost every day of the week in some capacity, right?
It varied. So, for a while, my dad was kind of an assistant pastor, musician. I grew up in originally, the church that, first brought them into the fold. And
Hmm.
then eventually he started his own church. And that required a little more time. But it didn't feel like we were necessarily at church. I was around, running around playing. It took it took a while to realize this was bigger than just hanging out with my cousins.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Can you describe what your church was like? Because I feel like everybody's churches are so different, and I would love to hear kind of what the culture looked like that you're coming from.
Yeah, we were sanctified holy rollers. What that means
Hmm.
is the women wore dresses down to their ankles, sleeves down to their wrists, no makeup, no pants, no earrings.
Wow.
Um, we couldn't listen to, the blues, the devil's music. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
even go to the movie theater.
Oh my
That
God.
that that was even a thing. It was
Ah.
life was about God doing the work of, the ministry.
So one word we would have thrown around back in our Christian days is like, oh, that sounds very legalistic. Is that kind
Mhm.
of an accusation that gets thrown around in that culture, or how is that viewed?
I don't know if the term legalistic is what I would apply to that experience necessarily.
Okay.
It was just holiness. You had to be set apart from the world in
Sure.
every
Okay.
way. So you needed
Right.
to look different, talk different, your fun was different,
Mm-hmm.
everything.
You felt you were very nurtured by this community. You don't particularly. I mean, I think you said in your survey that you didn't particularly feel angry or traumatized by the experience of church. It was just you were immersed in it and you felt really nurtured by the community.
Absolutely. Again, huge family. This is what we did. Sunday dinners, Friday nights, like these people were always in our lives. This was family. I didn't experience any, traumatic personal abuse or mistreatment in any way. I'm telling you, the music was fabulous.
Hmm.
It was amazing.
Uh
It
huh.
wasn't until I started to walk away and try to change the way I thought that I felt the traumatic experience.
Right.
Oh.
Let's talk about the music a little bit because we
Mhm.
honestly on this show, um, we tend to like the focus tends to be on how bad Christian music is, because in white church, quite frankly, like music is pretty bad. It's pretty run of the mill. It's pretty redundant. A lot of the pop music tends to be like a copy of something that's more popular, but the experience in black church is so different, right? I mean, you still really have a connection with that music.
Oh, absolutely. It was the music we did. Sure, there were more popular, famous gospel artists at that time that our choir would, sing their songs. But these were young musicians. They were writing music,
Mm-hmm.
playing the guitar and the drums and the organ and um, the baddest choir robes you've ever
Yeah.
seen with the rocks. I mean, it was a show. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. That's man.
That's so interesting to me that like what did you say, the rocks, like
Yeah.
what do you mean by that? What is that?
It's the side to side. It's the pause when you need to with the
Okay.
song and pick
Right.
it
Right.
back up.
Right.
It's the
Yeah.
hand clap up high and the hand clap down
Uh
low.
huh.
It
Uh
was
huh.
it was it was a
A
party.
little bit. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love like though just like this kind of juxtaposition between having like such an effort to be not flashy with the way that you look, like everything has to be so plain and everything covered up, but then like it's when you're in the music, it is kind of, it's a production, it's a big thing, and there's a lot of attention and everything. It's an interesting juxtaposition to me.
Well, I mean, what else did we do?
Right.
You
Uh
know,
huh.
everything that we did was centered around church, so we made that as amazing.
Right.
Mm.
Well,
So a lot of your like so much of your creative energy was going into that, because it wasn't going anywhere else, right?
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
so how I want to ask you this. I mean, like Chance the Rapper, for example, has like brought gospel music into the mainstream in a different way. Kanye is like about to release this gospel album, which God knows what that's gonna
Good Lord.
be. But like,
Uh-huh.
so I think a lot of people in our community struggle with, like, I really loved this Christian music, but I really have a hard time with the message now, or I associate it with some difficult things that I had to deal with. How does gospel music fit into your life now, or how do you go about engaging in that?
No, I don't listen to all of it.
Right.
I'm very particular. But there's some, especially some of the older songs, they still resonate and they remind me of, specifically in the Black community, the struggles that we've had and what
Mm.
we've overcome. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of just a soul lifting, feel good, keep fighting, keep pushing. We're winners. And from that perspective, I still connect very much. But there's some that's kind of just not my taste.
Totally
Uh-huh. For
understandable.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're a
Yeah.
little bit more selective about it, and I feel like maybe you take some different things out of it, or you emphasize different aspects of it now.
Yeah, I recognize the connection that the church has had in the Black community. I mean, we go back to slavery, and you're looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to create community, somewhere to feel safe, and that was the church, and music came out of that. So it's, in essence, it's life giving
Mm-hmm.
to some extent. I think some other things happen as a result. Just for me, I go back to that space and what that means for the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. That's yeah. I mean, that's super important. It's occurred to me. I mean, it's obvious. It's out there that, like, Christianity has sort of like served as a unifier for the Black community in a lot of, I mean, the civil rights era in particular. There are obviously two sides to that, right? I mean, Malcolm X's side was a little bit more Muslim focused. Dr. King's side was a little bit more, and I mean, not that they were like opposed to each other completely, but there was a divide there. But it seems to me, it seems like historically and even still now, that Christianity is sort of expected to be part of the Black community, or part of the Black identity. It has gotten the Black community through some very difficult things. It is also caused the black community a lot of problems, because you have, I mean, Christianity the Bible was used to justify slavery for however many years. And I mean, it's still is in like the dark corners of the South, right? So do you find yourself feeling like you are an outsider or somehow viewed as other in black what am I trying to say? Black
Spaces.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna reword that. Do you find yourself feeling like an outsider or otherly in black spaces?
Absolutely. I did a talk today at Colorado University around counseling in the Black community, and one of the um, obstacles, or something that a clinician has to consider is the allegiance that the Black community has to religion and or spirituality. And look, I have this because I spoke about it today, but these are some stats from Pew Report, and it says in America, Blacks lead in stats on belief in God at 83%. The importance of belief on one's life at 75%, frequency of prayer at 73%, and feelings of peace and well-being at 69%. In every area that this study looked at, Blacks were at the helm.
And interestingly, I think it may be the same study found that like black millennials aren't leaving church, and actually might be, I think, maybe even gaining attendance. So we tend to talk about the millennial generation as like the one that's definitely leaving, but it's not as true in the black community.
It's a social thing. Even if some believers aren't as dogmatic and committed and legalistic as some of the older generations, it still serves as a meeting place for socializing. It's
Perfect.
like, it's part of, like you said, the Black experience, these Black spaces. So for me, as a clinician, it took me a long time to actually say on my website, on my Instagram, that I was a secular therapist, because
Right.
I knew the effect that would have on the Black community, and my heart is for the Black community to get counseling, to get help. And I had to really make a decision. Am I going to and kind of separate myself, or do I, kind of play it to the left a little bit and just say, oh yeah, and I happen to work in religious trauma? But
Sure.
no, I have to be honest about who I am. And that's just a large part of my work. It's a large part of my life, my personal experience. And I didn't want to hide that.
When did you start to kind of pull away from your beliefs, and what kind of started to drive a wedge between that and what you just assumed to be true your whole life?
So the church that we talked about at the beginning, where the music was fabulous and all that, where my cousins and community was, that was the church of my youth.
Okay.
Once I grew up and left home, I moved from my small town in Alabama to Atlanta, Georgia, and I started going to one of those huge non-denominational churches. And that's like next, like thousands of members and all this stuff. And I actually kind of went deeper into word study.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the thing. That's the first time I actually read the Bible cover to cover and really wanted to understand this entire concept. And I loved God, and I was committed, and I'm knocking on doors, and I'm serving in the women's ministry.
Doing everything, yeah.
I am doing everything. I'm committed. They're getting my money, all of it. And I slowly just start to question really what I was reading. I saw all these inconsistencies. I saw things that just, everything a miracle. There's, the story about the prophet laying on the boy's body and he came to life. I'm like, isn't that like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, or warm bodies doing what warm bodies do when you try to help people? There were so many practical explanations that I started to see that originally were spiritual and magical. And I thought, this ain't really what, this is not what this is. No, and it led me to read other books. First, read the Bible or read books about the Bible. and I started to read other things, like
Hmm.
what other thoughts are out there. And,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, my dad, although he's committed, till his death, he was somewhat open-minded.
Okay.
So in his library, he would have different books about different thoughts. And I never really considered it until my path started to change and I thought about, whoa, I remember these books on my dad's shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to kind of read some of those to kind of see where he was headed. And it just took me on a path to a completely different space for myself.
That's interesting. I think a lot of us have kind of a similar story where we kind of go to the same church that we grew up in, but there's a moment in our life where we have to kind of take ownership, right? And we find the church that reflects what we believe or whatever. So I kind of
Mhm.
went through that same thing, but the emphasis on the second church was different for you. And so kind of like, do you think that getting away from the norm of your family and kind of like the dual relationships that you're living with as a
Yeah.
preacher's kid, do you think kind of getting away from that had to do with you starting to piece things together that maybe it wasn't the way that you thought it was?
Yeah, it fed something different. So, my childhood church I was born into it. It's all I knew.
Mm,
It was life. This new church, as a young adult, it was more of my choice. So I felt empowered in that way. It was also there was emphasis on doing well and Black excellence and not being in poverty and poor. And my family we weren't poor, but we didn't have a whole lot of stuff. A lot of people in our church and our community, no one was, you know, wealthy.
right.
But this church, oh my God, everyone had money. Everyone had a Mercedes or a BMW and huge homes and diamonds. And it was, whoa, they fed something else for me. They
Hmm.
showed me a different kind of Black experience, not
Mm-hmm.
just Black experience, but a different kind of Black church experience.
Mm-hmm.
I
Gotcha.
kind of got caught up in that.
Your deconstruction was not particularly related to any traumatic event. Nothing in particular happened. I mean, it seems like you had some things going on in your life at that point, but it was like pretty, and you kind of already said this, but pretty cognitive, right? You describe it as a
Hmm.
cognitive awakening.
Mm,
So you've made this transition from now you have this strong psychological foundation. Before you had this strong spiritual foundation. What was it that drew you particularly to psychology?
That's a really great question. I think I've just always been interested in why people do things,
mm,
Mm-hmm.
um, how the brain works, um, how much power do I really have as an individual?
Yeah, that's a good question.
mm.
Um, and, again, being in church from birth, the resource was always God. I didn't have to do much thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right.
you know, you just pray. You pray it away, you pray it in, whatever you need or don't need. It's all about prayer and going to God. And I wanted to know, can I do this on my own?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That is such a
um,
good question.
hmm Here's another interesting thing. The church that I went to in Atlanta, the minister was actually um, trained. I don't know if he was trained, but he was a psychology major,
Okay.
and he would bring a lot of that to his messages.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So that kind of opens you up a little bit to go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. He did talk about personal responsibility if God said so. You know what I mean? It was
Right.
Okay.
Right. Right. Right.
always this like God emphasis,
Right.
but education was very much highly supported.
Okay.
Um, I went back to school while I was in that
Mm-hmm.
church, but yeah, I just wanted to know, what I could do on my own.
Right.
Could I
Hmm.
could I think my way in and out of stuff? Do I really have to ask God about it?
Right. I love that. I love the way you worded that because to me, like my experience was a big part of my story is that I joined this support group, and the support group was like very much rooted in psychology, even though it was trying to sort of theologize it, if you will. And I kept finding that over the course of the like 3 years I was in this support group, I kept finding that the psychological things I was learning were like helping me so much more than the spiritual things I was learning.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like a big fan of Occam's razor, which is basically the concept. It's like in philosophy that the explanation with the least amount of steps, or the simplest explanation, is probably the truest, right? And I started to find that psychology was offering these much more succinct explanations for what I was seeing than what Christianity was offering. And the explanations for behavior and for why I'm the way I am and why that guy's the way that he is and why we interact with each other were just like so much more thought out, so much more accurate, I'm finding.
Yeah.
And it just slowly started, like, learning about psychology was a big part of what pulled me away from a more spiritual worldview, So I really love the way you put that.
I like that. I relate that to that as well. Like, coming from the Baptist fundamentalist background, therapy was kind of like an insult almost, like, oh, you need therapy. And that was kind of like our attitude with it. And it was discouraged. But whenever I finally started to go to a professional therapist and understood like how I can be self-aware of my thoughts, and CBT therapy and the other things that I was involved in, like that was a life changer for me. Night and day difference.
I mean, I watched people, struggling in life, in their marriages, struggling with depression, struggling with, life changes that they were experiencing. And, it was either God or the devil.
Yeah.
That's all we have.
Right.
This couldn't be, like you said, something else happening, in our brain, our body, and the chemicals, and something else is affecting what's happening in this person's life.
Right.
You mentioned that it was either God or the devil, and it's like there's two extremes, and that's the only place that you can find anything. It's the only two categories that you can put anything in. How fucked up is that, right? Like, how unnuanced. Can you speak to that a little bit, like from your professional perspective? Like, what does this black and white thinking come from, and how can it affect us?
Well, from my perspective, I think when you're in that world, you're trying to, one, do the right thing. You want God to be pleased. You want your life to be blessed. You want healing in your body, in your relationship. You want good jobs. It requires obedience. And there's no gray area in obedience. You're either doing what the Lord says, or you're not.
In rebellion.
And that's in rebelling. And then that's the devil's side, And the other thing that I think that thinking robs us of is personal responsibility, because
that's so
if you do something jacked up to someone, then it's the devil made me do it. Repent to God, and we'll make things better. You could even do something fantastic. You could do something amazing that changes your whole family's life. Go to college, or I don't know, figure something out that's just fantastic, and you still don't get to say, I did that. That belongs to God.
Right.
You never really you don't own your good or your bad. You're just kind of this person existing, waiting to die and get your reward in heaven or
hell, right?
Yeah.
The other problem with that too, with having a kind of a culture that's built on that sort of forgiveness, right? Like it's more of like, okay, well, I forgive you, and that becomes the expectation. And so what I noticed is it's easy for people to become bullies, or for people to get stuck in situations where they're constantly being victimized by the same people, because the Bible says, well, forgive them 70 times 70, or there's a verse that says, and if they say that they repent, then you are to just accept that and not question, and then to treat them as if they are fine. So I see a big difference between like this apology, like I'm sorry thing, and making amends, right? Where
Oh,
you
right.
actually
Yeah.
take responsibility for what you've done and you are able to kind of word it in a way that um, does justice to the situation.
Absolutely. You know, after leaving, my entire thought process around forgiveness changed.
Mm.
I find that the institutions that require you to forgive even the most heinous act, the most
Mm-hmm.
evil abuse, are churches,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
religion, and often your family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your gross old uncle could have touched
Yeah.
you for all your childhood, and he's still at the dinner table. No one's confronting that,
Right.
and that same concept exists in religion. I prayed, I'm forgiven. You gotta let me back in. And when you take away God and my forgiveness is what gets me into heaven, so I got to do this. Take that away, and you get to really deal with these injustices. You really get to confront that person that did that, and no, you're not invited into my home and in my space. I get to,
Wow.
set
Yeah.
boundaries and have a safe place. And that's just one example, but it really changed my entire around forgiveness. And I don't it's not something that's automatic for me. I don't force it. Not everyone that does me harm is forgiven.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'm not God. Why is my forgiveness so important
Right.
to you?
Right.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, the thought is usually, well, if you don't forgive, then you're harming yourself. No, 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 I'm fine because the evil person, the abuser, the person that mistreated me is no longer in my space.
I love there's a balance to it, right? I mean, like if you are overtaken by bitterness and you're thinking about the stuff that they've done, yeah, that's a whole other story that we could
Right.
talk about. But what you're talking about is, I've
Based. Yeah.
in church there's these weird I've had weird circumstances where somebody had like a bad thought about me, so they needed to come and
Oh God.
apologize to
Yeah.
it,
Oh, that
and it was like
totally.
these
Yeah.
weird like backdoor passive
Yeah.
aggressive
Yeah.
things.
And it's usually like very ambiguous in their anyway. Yeah, that's a weird thing.
It's
that
a
happens. I've kind of
weaponization
forgotten
of
about that.
right, it's a weaponization of not just forgiveness but bringing up the offense when it really wasn't. It was a non-offense,
Right.
but like that's what the focus is on, is like these weird black and white like, oh, I had a bad thought, now I need to like spin out of control until I feel better about the thought that I've had that was evil, until I feel like I'm on the good side again, and it's just looking for that internal confirmation of our feelings that
Right.
it doesn't add
So
up. That's not how it works.
let me jump in because I don't. Okay, so I don't want to get you in trouble. I know you have to choose how you approach things professionally, but since it's been in the conversation recently, the issue of black forgiveness, right? I mean, we have the shooting, we have an actual murder in Texas, right? A police officer murdering somebody in their own house with no discernible like reason to do so. And we have, I don't have any particular strong feelings about the relative of the victim choosing to like forgive and embrace the police officer, but there's this larger conversation that I think ties in with the pervasive nature of Christianity in the black community, is that this idea that we have to forgive everybody that wrongs us, right?
Mhm.
How do you feel about that? Are you okay addressing that? Because I can cut that if you don't want to talk about it.
I just read the numbers, right? We see how impactful religion and spirituality is on the Black community. It's really it's at the base. It's fundamental. And this is me personally. This isn't even about any clients that may come to my office. This is just my personal perspective. When I saw that, I felt multiple emotions. I felt anger.
Hmm.
I felt sadness. I felt hurt, and so much came up for me. Um, the people that, while I was in church, that really did a number on me, that were just in relationships, mistreated me,
Hmm.
and how I forced myself to forgive and I stayed in that space, and then I was mistreated again. And it's almost like I'm going to get a cookie for this, though. No, maybe you are the evil person, but my reward is coming
Okay.
soon. And there's never any true confrontation or that space for that person to deal with it. In this case, she's going to go to jail. Maybe she'll think about it. Who knows? Um,
Maybe.
maybe, but I think there's something to say for a human being to be able to set boundaries
I love that.
between themselves and um, a killer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
I
just
mean, as
that's
an
just what
extreme
it is.
example, right?
It's an extreme example, and I'm thinking
But
about that.
it's real, but it's like
I,
real and like pervasive in our culture. So it's like, as extreme as it is, it's not that, unfortunately, not that unusual of a scenario.
no, I have so many stories. I know someone that was in a relationship, and her husband was a womanizer, and you know contracted HIV, brought it home to her, and she was still praying for
Mm-hmm.
God
God.
to change him and heal her. He since died, and now this is her life.
Wow.
Where's God?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't buy the whole, well, there's a lesson in this. Well,
Mm-hmm.
the lesson is we get to set boundaries. We get to say no. We get to
Right.
remove harmful people out of our spaces.
Yeah.
I love that.
I thank you for that. That was
Yeah.
such a good answer. Thank you, because the it's one of those issues that sort of gets swept under the rug because our culture outside of church values forgiveness so much, and especially there's this like I mean, there's this white black dynamic where it's just like white people just expect to be forgiven. Like and it doesn't go both ways in my opinion.
Mhm.
Black people do not expect to be forgiven in our culture, and white people do. And it's so pervasive that I feel like a lot of the black community just gives into the cultural dialogue, and can even be, Fox News or whatever can even will even go so far as to, if somebody is angry about murder, will say like, well, why can't they let this go? Why, and it's like this horrible, and it's there on this big scale, and it's there with this black white thing, but it's also there with people that are just leaving church. It's there with people that
Yeah.
were expected their
Any
whole
version of
lives to just let
otherness,
it go,
right?
and it's on this macro scale, and it's on this micro scale, and it's like super important to acknowledge that we just don't have to forgive people sometimes.
Right. And what I thought about, that's in that situation, that was that I think it was the brother. That's his personal choice at the end of the day, right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
what he wants to do, that's what he wants to do. If it helps him sort through it and move on with his life.
Yeah.
I think, kind of along the lines of what you just said, it's on the big screen. It's for the world to see. And I think about that with even my clients that are, on the verge and slowly moving away. It's one of those things where, well, maybe, he did it. It's almost like a testimony. He did it. He forgave such a, incredible injustice. Maybe I can do this too. Maybe I should go back to this spouse that abuses me. Maybe I should
Mm,
um, let nasty old uncle stay with us because God's going to bless me for my forgiving heart.
mm-hmm.
That's where I get concerned. Is how is that interpreted? The effect that
Mm-hmm.
has
Wow.
on the lives of other people.
And I think you even mentioned before, because if you are around that creepy uncle, you're almost doing that as a action of your faith, of like, well, I believe God, wants me to forgive, and so now I'm going to be protected. But then you fall into being victimized over and over
Right.
and over.
Surprise. Like, God doesn't actually protect people because he probably isn't real,
I definitely choose that. We need to take a break.
Yes.
And when we get back, there's this subject of what it means to be trauma informed, and what exactly that phrase means. When we get back, do you mind if we cover that a little bit?
Sure.
Awesome.
Cool.
We will be right back right after this. Okay, Chuck, are you ready? We only have one shot. We got to make this work.
Wait, you didn't
Just
give me...
just read your lines. I'll give you the paper. Okay.
Okay.
Are you guys ready? Are you ready? All right. Are you ready
Where
to
did they-
deconstruct with friends?
What the hell? Where did all this come from?
Deconstructing your faith used to be lonely
got a band?
and boring as hell.
Wait.
But no one must deconstruct their faith alone ever again when you deconstruct with friends. Chuck, tell them what we mean.
Yeah,
Go.
that's right, Brady.
Yeah.
The Life After has what the hell, Brady?
I went full on Jumanji on this one, but keep going. He's a rental by the hour.
The Life After podcast has a secret Facebook community and Slack channel for people deconstructing the Christian fundamentalism and other oppressive religions. Meet new people
And elephants.
and deconstruct with friends.
Nice job, Chuck. You even got the echo.
Thanks. That was kind of cool, I guess. Oh God, he's touching me with his trunk.
You can apply for the secret group
It's wet.
on our Facebook by answering 3 entrance questions. Your membership is hidden, and the admins keep the room constructive and helpful.
Now, can we get this elephant out of here?
Nope, probably not, but we can.
Deconstruct with friends. There it is.
There we go. Welcome back to Life After. Hey, so what I want to touch on, if that's cool, is what does it mean to be trauma informed? So that's kind of a catchphrase that I'm hearing in the, in the online spaces of people who have left fundamentalism, and I want to know what that means and what our listeners can benefit from that.
From a clinician's perspective, I think it's invaluable to understand the trauma-informed care. We want to make sure that we understand what trauma is, we're able to recognize it, respond to it appropriately, and to not re-traumatize our clients. And that's my responsibility as a clinician. As a client, a lot of times it's about psychoeducation. Maybe a client knows that something's off. They're not even sure what's happening. And that's an opportunity for us to educate them on what trauma is and what they're experiencing in their body, in their mind, these levels of anxiety that are increased around a person or after a specific event, like what's happening with me. And that in itself is empowering.
Right.
We're talking about religious trauma, but if they can't even name it, they can't even pinpoint it, you can never get free. You can never really heal properly until you really understand what's going on. And that's the beauty of therapy. We're talking about, let's just go pray. And maybe you emotionally feel better for a minute. You dance and sing and whew, it's over. Nah, it'll be right there in the morning because we never really processed. We never really got to the root of what's happening. We never even developed any new ways of being or new ways of thinking so that you're not re-traumatized, that you're not back in that same situation again.
So what does that look like for our situation about leaving religion then? How does that affect our community?
I start with every client around religious trauma specifically. I start with, tell me your story. I wanted to know how they were introduced to religion, what kind, what they experienced while in it, what brought them to question and or leave. That's where I like to start because it is not my intention to rid the world of religion.
Right.
I need to know where my clients are, what their needs are. Can they express those needs? Like I said, my experience in the church, I personally was not mistreated.
Mm-hmm.
I just, like I said, cognitively, I just didn't believe it anymore. So I couldn't just sit there. I had to move on with my life. But some people, it's a source of strength, community, and they're able to still live fruitful lives, still, make sound decisions about what they want to do. They're able to set boundaries. They can still do those things and still have this sense of spirituality. And if that works for them, then fine. So the process, I'm very person centered. I need to know where this person is and what they need, what their goals are. And if I see something that's dangerous, like we said, re-injuring yourself, going back to some situation where you truly are mistreated, then we need to talk about that. What's a healthy way? What's a healthy relationship? What's the give and take? Again, it's around psychoeducation.
I like that, because kind of what the theme that I'm hearing you say is that kind of the first step is to have definitions and vocabulary for things, be able to define them, to be able to look at your relationship that you're having with your church and say, is this healthy or not? Kind of having more categories to put this in, because the church does not create a category for you of saying, here is spiritual abuse or here is abuse. It's just, you're part of this community. You need to keep going with the flow. So when we're kind of giving this new vocabulary, we're allowing ourselves to say, there's other options that I could be falling into, and then seeing how those can be avenues to find healing, or to get out of the religion completely, or to stay in it and find a new, more healthy way to express it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the weird things about trauma in particular is that up front it can often look like a lot of other things, right? It can be like the effects or the symptoms of trauma can be misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder, or can like some form of schizophrenia or something like that if you're having these really intense reactions to trauma. How do you go about parsing? I mean, like, okay, that's a really big question. I'm not gonna that's like really specific, but
Chuck just wants to know he's asking for a friend, right? Right. So if he's hearing 20 voices and they're all saying,
can you diagnose me right now?
Chuck's like, I'm Jesus. Is this okay?
I guess right, yeah. So God told me this morning. So I think what my question is what is it specifically about trauma that makes it so pervasive, that makes it so like it affects so many different parts of your mental health?
Here's the thing, when we talk about religious trauma, because religion is so accepted.
Yes.
That's what makes people want to separate it. Okay. Oh, you're just depressed. No. Something really, I'm experiencing something. It's related to this religious experience. And again, not validated. And the DSM will tell you, talk about schizophrenia and talk about these things where, our psyche is separating or creating spaces to protect itself in a different way, or you hear voices, and we can put that in this category, right? But then if you say, oh, but it was around a religious experience, now all of a sudden this is accepted and it's holy and it's, oh, you're just hearing from God.
Wow.
And because in that space anymore, I'm able to say, no, let's really look at this. Who are you speaking to? Are you hearing voices? Let's talk about that. And what traumatic experience could have made you or your brain separate in a way, separate's not the best word to use, create safe places within yourself,
right?
Hide from these traumatic experiences. Religion is again, we talked a minute about it being a place of support and comfort for people, and also be a major hindrance and a reason to stay enmeshed in all of that stuff, because someone is seeing you as super religious and super close to God when you could really be falling apart.
Right.
Shit.
Yeah,
that's the truth.
I think about that all the time, and it's sort of like when I'm describing the show to people, I sort of try to throw in like the reason that we can have a whole show about religious trauma is because religion affects every aspect of your life.
Yeah.
And it has all of these different nooks and crannies and nuances that it can hide itself in. And it in the traumatic aspect of it, if you're traumatized by it, can come out in any of those ways, right?
But the thing too about questioning if you're indoctrinated or trying to figure out if you have like the right beliefs or whatever, all the tools that you have to validate and verify are being touched by the religion as well, right? So one of the reasons that it's so pervasive is that all the tools that you need to move on or to question or to verify, all of that's being is being held by the religion. And so I don't know, it's kind of like who's policing the police at that point. And I love what you said too about there is this assumption that because it is religion, it has to be a positive thing. And I know that that's something that Dr. Marlene has mentioned in her book too, that stuck out to me, that trying to even initiate these conversations are difficult because you have to plow through this cultural bias that we have with, a lot of the materials we have were written at a time where that religious thing was just kind of assumed, right? But now that we're beyond that, we've progressed, we get our facts in different ways than before. We're able to have more resources and more information, and so it feels like that sort of bias is not fitting in with our culture now, where we want to have evidence for things and we want what's going to have the best results. And so I feel like that's kind of creating another sort of friction that previous cultures or previous generations didn't have to really encounter as much.
It's like a cognitive dissonance that happens within a person who's questioning these things, but this is God. We talked about earlier, they put that filter on, so I got to look at this filter, but I know something's off, but I can't say that. So I'm going to go to church anyway. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to continue to pray and get the word, even though something else is happening. I'm getting information. Like I said, we get it. You go on Instagram, you can get so much information. Not saying it's all accurate, but there's just a lot more conversation. There's a lot more information, a lot more resources. And, sometimes someone will be so engaged with me on Instagram around this stuff, and then all of a sudden they just cut off. And I get that though, because you start to touch places that are like, whoa. Again, that cognitive dissonance will set you back. And then you start trying to live these dual life where I'm still a believer, but I really don't believe it, because you don't want to lose bits of what that belief brings you.
It's like what you've said before, Chuck, about as you're going through the beliefs, like how many do you actually need to boxes do you need to check to still be considered a Christian, right?
Yeah. How much of the Bible do you need to believe, or whatever do you need to? Because
I mean, we could say, oh, it's a narrative, but when the narrative claims to be true or to have some sort of manifestation on our real life now, then it matters,
right?
And to act like it doesn't matter is gaslighting. Right?
Yeah, I remember one time this pastor at this really shitty Baptist church I was at was like,
First Baptist Church is shit.
Basically, was like giving this talk about apologetics, and he was like, how come there's only two copies of Plato, but they never questioned the authenticity of Plato? And it's like, because Plato wasn't trying to dictate the way we live our day-to-day lives.
And also Plato didn't claim outrageous supernatural things that have no precedence in real life.
Right, exactly. Well, he kind of did, but like nobody believes him anymore, so nobody questions it, right?
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so kind of tied to that, you have some interesting commentary on and work with your clients on community building and loss of community, right? So that was a really big thing for you in your story. We didn't really talk about it, but it seems like the hardest thing for you was the loss of that community, because your whole life up to this point where you decided to leave Christianity was church. It was church community. It was seeing these people in this setting, singing some songs, and you start to try and build your life outside of that, and you just have nothing. And then you also find yourself at this point where you can't go back either, because you won't let yourself, and
honest,
B, like,
right.
may have already been alienated by the community that you were a part of. So how did you go about community building, and how do you talk to your clients about that?
Man, just really quickly, when you talked about, can you go back because you're alienated? I stayed in the closet for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was out mentally, but physically, communal, I was there. I was still showing up. I was still hanging out with friends. I would just leave and go, what the
Yeah.
That's all we talk about is the Bible, and I don't even believe this stuff anymore.
Yep.
And then what would they say if I really told them what I was thinking?
Yeah.
And I started with a very select few people that I spoke to intimately, and together we could, question, what the pastor was doing, or question some of the things that were being taught, and we could agree that, this ain't it. This is manipulation. Go there. But then when I stepped all the way out and said, you know what, I think the whole thing it's like break,
dead stop.
Stop. There were people that no longer talked to me anymore altogether. There were people that it became more like, hey, how are you? Cool. All right, bye. Just no depth in our relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was heartbreaking.
That is hard.
That was the part that just, I'm still Suandria. I'm still the same woman. I'm still
right.
qualities that you enjoyed in me as a person are still there. I just don't believe in God.
Yeah.
And that was traumatic in and of itself. But it was still in my circle, right? But when I felt like it was time to kind of show that on a broader scale, the person that came to mind for me the most was my mom. I did not want to break her heart.
Right.
And I didn't want her to be embarrassed because all of her church friends and our family would, look at her some kind of way. I lost my sister. It's been 11 years, December. I think it's 11 years. And there was a minister that told her, you wouldn't lose a child if you were doing everything God wanted you to do.
Jesus. Oh, come on.
That something like that just recently happened to one of the members in our community too. That she's no longer a believer, so a church had used her daughter passing away as a sermon illustration, and it's like, oh my God, like, so inappropriate and so wrong.
It's heartless. It's selfish. And she just didn't deserve that. She was a mom grieving, losing her child. How is that God?
Right.
Where's God's love in that? And it's that sort of thing that gave me the courage to stand up.
Yeah.
Say, no, thank you. I'm not a part of this. You're not going to keep re-injuring people. And my mom's a sweet lady, and she, will say that it hurt, but I'll say, fuck them. You know what I mean? I'm just that other side. Just leave her alone.
Right.
And, not just for my mom, it just grew to, me wanting to be that person that said, hey, life, there's another way. There's another community. And, as I opened up, I found other spaces. I found other people. It's similar to a breakup. If you create this life with this person, your family, your friends, your holidays, like, it's all about, your world. And then you break up, and who gets the friends and who gets the dogs. And you kind of forget that there's a whole world out there. So there's a concept that I use in therapy, and it's from choice theory, reality therapy. And it talks about our quality worlds. And in these quality worlds, we have people in them, right? So maybe I have my husband, my kid, my mom, my best friend, like all these people that are super important to me. And if they are not intact, that I'm not happy, I'm not well, right? But we put them in there. So we put them in there, we can also take them out. It doesn't mean that they're
Mm-hmm.
completely out of our life, but they don't have to be that inner core support that helps you do life well,
Right.
right? And I like to do that on paper, and people kind of see it and go, "Whoa, whoa, I can just do that." Now, obviously, to do that in real life, to walk that
Right.
painful, to grieve those losses, but to show people that you can, just like you can take those people out of that intimate space, you can put new people in there and still feel
Mm.
just as fulfilled in this new community.
I
Mm.
fucking love that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I love about therapy is just having like concepts like that help you like just filter the way that you take in information and the way that you live your life, and just
Right.
using that abstract part of our minds again, of like that we used to use, that always just directed things to, oh, that was God or that was Satan. Now we can use that same like filtering like mental system, change it completely and say, no, there's other categories where whatever, you get what I'm saying. I'm just, what I love is that we're able to kind of use the abstract parts of our mind again,
Right.
but to heal from the stuff that the last set of rules made, you know.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm. And there's still, there's a grieving process. I don't make light of it or, make any promises that everything's going to be,
Right,
like,
right.
you are grieving your losses. Um, but after that grief, you can rebuild. It's a real thing. It's available. There are people waiting to love you and embrace you, and walk in this new way of life with you. It's not, if when church is all you've known, you don't even know the possibilities
Mm-hmm.
of community outside of that. And for me, my community grew. It's way bigger than it used to be. Different people, different thoughts. Some are still Christian, some are, various beliefs. It's a huge community of thinkers.
Yeah.
So that's actually, you bring up an interesting point, because you do work with people that are still Christians. You work with people that have probably different religious beliefs. Your goal as a therapist is not to like draw people out of Christianity, right? I mean, like that would be like super problematic in the profession. But so I mean, I feel like, okay, so I've thought a lot about this, and I don't want to be too I don't want to, like, we try to be fair, but we're also kind of hard on religion because we see how it's hard on other people. But at the same time, like, I can't not acknowledge at the end of the day that there are communities and there are people that really need religion because it's the thing that gives them a sense of purpose, and they struggle to find a sense of purpose, whether it's for socioeconomic reasons or because it's, because their life is just really hard and complex. I mean, I'm thinking about, like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like there are these tiers of existence, and for people that have their basic needs taken care of, like food and shelter, it's a lot easier to like go about the like very complex process of establishing your own purpose. Or people that have their social needs met are more likely
That's
to
a
be
good
able to
point.
like
Yeah.
establish purpose. But there's a phase in life in a lot of people that are not in positions where it's like super easy, or they're in social situations where it's very difficult to step outside of religion, or they're just not ready yet. So your goal is not to eradicate religion, but you do help people reface, you do help people rethink, you help people that are going through transitions. What does that look like, and how do you go about that without stepping on too much on people's beliefs?
Um, you know, so I've long, knocking on people's doors and trying to lead them to Christ.
Right.
Um, and just because I'm outside of that religious space, I'm not going to trade one type of proselytizing for another.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not trying to create mini Sundrias. Everyone needs to think like me and be like me. This is, that's not my goal. The goal is simple in that it doesn't depend what, it doesn't matter what we're working on as far as my clients are concerned. I'm always attuned to them and what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't change. So if the need is, I still love God. I'm just struggling with how to walk out being a good wife because maybe, this thought around submission doesn't work for me. So how
Mm-hmm.
do I, and I just help them kind of walk through that place that's safe for them to question without someone throwing the Bible back in their face.
Wow, yeah.
Trying to edit where they land. That's not where they land is up to them. They're going to leave the office after our 50-minute session and have to do life on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal is to help people feel confident to question, and to be able to eventually make these decisions on their own.
Damn good. Like long term. That's
Yeah, yeah.
teach them
I
to
mean, why
fish or
would
give them some, right?
right. I mean, otherwise I'd be another church, right?
Right.
I
So,
don't, go ahead.
so the goal, and I feel like I feel like our goal as like a podcast in a community is like to empower people to make their own decisions, to draw their own conclusions. Um, I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of people that are coming out, I mean, very common symptom of religious trauma is black and white thinking and being stuck in this like it's this
one
or
extreme
this.
or the other.
It's A or B, and it's like some people take that and they apply it to like like they'll just jump into the far like the liberal like cancel culture sort of like view of things, and just like all of a sudden it's like about that kind of morality instead of biblical morality. But like that, the goal is not to adopt a new system that tells you what to think, right?
Right.
The goal
Right.
is to establish your own critical thinking skills.
Mhm.
How do you encourage people to do that? Because I feel like that's such an abstract, difficult thing to explain to somebody.
It is, and it's going to sound funny probably, but I take them back to at least to imagine themselves as
As a
I-
because
child.
yeah, because as a child you're free to dream and explore and play and imagine.
Right.
Um, no one's editing that. You get to hang out in that space and be as free as you want to be. And I invite people to go there. Like, what do you imagine your life to be? What would your marriage look like if you did it in a new way? We're not asking God. You're not asking Sandria. You're not. This is your space, just you and your private, intimate place in your heart. What do you imagine for yourself? And sometimes that in itself, for a religious person, is so difficult to give themselves the permission
Yeah.
to just imagine and to dream, because that filter is there, and I'm able to say, well, if I kind of see that it's been colored by some of that dogma, I'll point it out. Well, that sounds like this. Is that different from what you imagined? Or is that similar to what you want? And how does that feel for you? Does that feel safe? It's not, they walk in my office and boom, we're out of this stuff. It's a process. It's an owning of your, like you said, being able to think. It's an owning of your mind. It's an owning of your heart, and creativity and exploration. I always felt like in religion, it was like being a kid constantly on my mother's breast. Like I never grow up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I never had to fully think because the answers were given to me. I never had to, like we said earlier, face some of these really difficult things in other people, or even in those dark places in myself, because there was an answer for it. I never had to think through it, process, and kind of dig and figure out why I'm this way. So in my work, I provide a space for clients to do that. It's safe. No one has to know. Where you end up landing for yourself, what feels right for you, is so personal. Not everyone leaves the church.
Right.
It's kind of like what you said earlier. Your intention is to be patient focused, people focused, and so if it is good for them to still have some sort of faith expression, it's different than what was harming them. Then that's a great thing for them to do, and it can help them.
Right. And I mean, look at it. The reality is, people are interpreting this book in a multitude of ways. We each of us come from three different types,
Yeah,
Christian
yeah.
backgrounds. So even in that, if all these people who love God by way of Christ can interpret it and live their life in all of these different ways, why can't you? Why can't you have that freedom?
Yeah.
If that relationship is between you and God is who He says He is, why can't you be okay? You
That is,
know?
that is such a good way to frame that, because it's not like that terminology is not among the forbidden terminology of Christianity, right? So it's like it gives you a little bit of flexibility even within the system, even if you're not quite out, even if you're not there yet or won't be there or whatever. That still gives you permission to make room for yourself as an individual.
Yes. Yes. Make room for yourself and to own it. And then you get to feel the strength of your power, the strength of being able to make a decision, the strength of, like, you do something amazing. You get to own, I did that. And you grow from that space. Or if I did something horrible, oh, I got to own that. That hurts. I feel guilty. Let me work through my shit so that I don't do that again. Then your relationships become healthier. You're starting to really own all of those parts of yourself.
Very cool.
I love it.
So, okay, let me ask you one more question, because quite frankly, to be completely honest with everybody listening, the show is like a little bit too white, It's like,
yes.
I mean, it's been very fortunate to have a variety of guests from very different backgrounds in different marginalized communities, but like it's a white, I grew up in white culture, even though half of my family's black. Brady's white as fuck. I mean, you couldn't be any whiter. Just kidding. No, so I want to get into a little bit more into the black space, because okay, so we talked earlier about you being a black non-believer and having and struggling in that space, particularly you as that individual that you see your black family, you find yourself in black spaces. How do you personally cope with that? How do you deal with it? How do you make yourself feel included in black spaces?
I just bring myself to the table. When I was actually transitioning, because I was partly insecure, because I didn't know where I was going to land. I knew I was having a problem with my current way of thinking, what it was going to look like in the future. I didn't know. I feel insecure. So that in itself kind of made me hide a little bit. And then when I felt a little more comfortable, now I'm angry. Now I'm pissed off. So even if I am in those circles and Jesus comes up, fight, I'm ready to debate, like I'm ready to get in it.
Right.
But I've landed in a place where I'm confident in who I am. I don't need anyone to agree or disagree with me. Like, who cares? Where do we connect? If we connect on, we're both moms and we love our children, then let's talk about our kids. If we, are into certain music or fashion or movies, like there's so many other things to connect with people on, and that's what I focus on. And honestly, again, sometimes depending on the circle, that religious thought or talk is such a social thing that it's social on Sunday.
That makes sense.
That is not really a big deal the rest of the week for some people.
Right.
Or they just prayer and you're private and you keep living your life.
Sometimes it's kind of like outsourcing the theme of your small talk.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it feels like to me. I mean, there's definitely things that like, oh, because you believe the same thing as me, then we're going to have common experience. We're going to feel like a kinship. But a lot of times I feel like I've looked at my relationships with people while I was in the church, and I still crave something deeper. But we didn't really have the words for that because we thought what we were talking about was the most ultimate everything ever, but I just found it also lacking. And I also found myself when I was in those environments having to make myself smaller with the hobbies that you just mentioned, where we have these other interests. And I felt like I had to kind of make that a smaller part of who I was so that I can grow in this holiness or whatever. But now that I'm outside of that, it's like, no, I can tweet about how much I love television and I watch it, like, and to
Right.
be able to talk about like the other things that make me me. And,
Yes.
and just one last thing is and we've talked about this, Chuck, too, with our creativity, right? Like when our creativity was always wrapped up in doing something for the Lord, or like, Christian music, or for me, it was writing. I wanted to write these Christian allegories,
Oh, God.
but now like trying to rediscover my, my creativity without having to have that filter on, raw dog in it, if you will. It's harder to find that, like that new, trying to find that new voice because I'm not having to do an accent, you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's so, that part about you're thinking you're in these deep relationships and then you realize you're really not. Like it's still surface. We're all still
Mm.
giving
Yes.
um,
Yes.
give an answer. Ain't God good? Yes, he is.
All the
All the time. All the
time.
time. Like everything's already planned. So how
Yeah.
do you go deeper if you're, everyone's quoting the scripture back
Right.
at you this quick? It's just amen and
Yeah.
everything, and no one's exploring or trying anything new.
Well, because the church that I went to, well, the last church that I went to, I was disfellowshipped. So literally, I lost those relationships and friendships in a moment. And that's sobering as fuck, right? Of like, I've spent nearly a decade with these people. This has been my, replacement for a family. This is my entire support system. And we think that it's all built on, well, because this same God who lives in me is living in you. And we think that it's this really deep thing, this is such a deep relationship that it's supernatural, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then we have these circumstances in our experience that show, oh, well, if I start filtering my beliefs in just a slightly different way, I'm anathema. Or if I am disfellowshipped over, spiritual abuse, then I'm outside of the club, and it's just that quick, that fast. Man, that's so sobering, to realize that, God, it's not, these relationships are not as deep or meaningful as
No,
they
they're
come across.
really like, dude, that was one of the things that got me out, was like going back to the support group I was in, which was a Christian support group, but again, it was like rooted in psychology, right? So
Yeah.
it was like we were getting into these conversations that were so outside of what was acceptable in church that I was like, oh,
Finally.
you can have like,
Mm-hmm.
this goes way deeper, right? But I wanted to point out something about what you said, which was like, the first thing you said was like, well, if I want to get in an argument about it, like I'm not afraid
Ready
to
to
do
rumble,
that,
right?
But also like if I want to just talk about TV or movies, like I can do that too. And I think that a lot of people that are deconstructing get stuck in this dualistic, like either they need to evangelize their new beliefs, right? And sort of like get into the argument every time because they have to convince their mom that it's okay to be gay, or they feel like they're so afraid that they don't want to get into it at all, so they kind of hide. But the reality is, like, it's up to you that day. Like listen to yourself, listen to your body, decide, do I have it in me today to pick a fight or not? And if you don't have to pick a fight. You can talk about other stuff. And if you don't have the space for whatever the conversation topic is, you have the choice to leave. Also,
It's your choice, your power.
it is that's the whole point of like, it's your choice, your power. Yes, absolutely. That's so good.
Tell us about that. What does that mean? What is your choice, your power?
That is exactly what it means. Because I didn't feel I had choice. Everything was already given. My life was scripted. This is what we do. There's nothing else to really out, unless I was waiting on a word from the Lord to see what the next thing was, but it wasn't me. But once I came out and I started making choices, I started to see my personal power. I started to see my life change because of decisions and choices I was making. All of a sudden, it was like, whoa, I talk about supernatural. I felt supernatural all of a sudden. I wasn't waiting. I didn't need permission. I
I
didn't need
love
a
that.
word or a
Mm.
scripture for someone to make it so for me. It's like, Sandra, if you want to change your life, if you want to make more money, if you want more education, if you want to be healthier and more fit, if you want to travel the world, get off your ass. You don't have to, pray and fast to get an answer. Just go do it. Be
Mm.
practical. Enjoy life. Participate. And that's where I came up with it's my choice. It's my power to wield as I see fit.
And that's what you named your website. Can you tell us a little bit about the services that you give that our customers? Ew. Oh, I'm so sorry. Edit this out. Our listeners, Jesus, to see what our listeners can do to get in touch with you and what you're doing.
Sure. So visit my website. It's mychoicemypower.com. You can also visit me on Instagram, and it's, what is it? My Choice, My Power Counseling.
Okay.
Uh, and I offer counseling. I focus religious trauma, women's issues, and life transitions. And oftentimes they all kind of
Oh,
roll into
damn.
one
Yeah.
thing.
Big time.
Uh-huh. I offer counseling in your area, but I also provide counseling online. So if you're in Colorado, we can do online counseling at any time. If you're outside of Colorado, I offer coaching, and we can still do some work around this in that area online as well.
Mhm.
So I try to make it accessible and take away excuses for people.
I love that.
Very cool.
God, that's so important. I love therapy so much, and just because of my background where it was so frowned upon, and to know, like what you said, Chuck, you say it all the time and you nail it, about how quickly you were able to start seeing improvements in your life because you were able to be given the tools that actually help. The tools that are built on observation that we all can see, and not on being told what to be seen, right?
The secret observations that some can see.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about faith, right? Is that faith is where we see something, but when you're told what to see first,
right?
Then it's like you're not working on tools that everybody can be using. It's not built on real life. But I see, like what you're saying, Suandria, just like a big shift between your cognitive dissonance of just depending on that one thing, right? And then shifting over to real life, and to then move our mindset and our expectations to our real life. And what you said earlier about prayer makes so much sense to me too, because when we prayed, it was because we wanted God to do something for us. And so we always punted the action over to him, right? But when we change our viewpoint, and we change how we gain information and how we view the world, we become that agent of change. So instead of asking somebody else to do it, instead of outsourcing it, we become that own source, right? And God, the way you described that, I think I don't know, it really stuck with me.
Nailed it.
Love it.
Nailed it.
Fucking love it.
Suandria Hall, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you. That was good.
One more time, what's your website?
mychoicemypower.com.
Very cool. And My Choice, My Power Counseling on Instagram as well. Okay, very cool. Thanks for being on the show. This is awesome.
Definitely.
And always remember,
if you don't go to church,
Sunday is
just the second Saturday.
Let me kind of unpack that for you a little bit.
In the middle, I am no Malcolm, I ain't no Martin. More like 95 Spartans kicked out the garden. Back to back stab at God King and ask for his pardon. My mind trying to break out the margins, writing reflections on loose leaf. Listen hard, my jargon is Darwin, inciting infections of unbelief. Like what in the hell is a spiritual walk? But meditating on TED Talks, elevating events that are non-stop, circulating your views in a closed crop. cutting verses up like a chop shop, with copies and signs like a bookshop, pasted in like Bibles on backdrops. Feeling bad for shit on your laptop, it's a bad prop for holding beliefs in a sad book, relieving your grief in an outlook that promises peace with a bait hook that doesn't release. I was caught on the line of repression, asking myself the same question over and over and over with no progression. Decided to change my only direction ahead, leaving the foe for the spread, headed to hell in my bed. If living is lying down, then I'd rather be dead. They said our thoughts are dangerous, nobody's can we trust, like we're made of